The HOA president called 911 to arrest me for fishing on their private dock. So I showed police the 87-year-old deed proving I own the entire lake. She got arrested for trespassing on MY property instead. I tripled their annual fees and she moved away at a $200,000 loss. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching, also like and subscribe for more stories. They called 911 because I was fishing from their private dock. 20 minutes later, I was having the entire HOA board escorted off MY property in handcuffs for trespassing. The confrontation started at 5:43 a.m. on what should have been a peaceful Tuesday morning. I was sitting on the old wooden dock with my coffee and fishing rod, watching the sunrise paint the water gold, when I heard the crunch of expensive shoes on gravel behind me. "Excuse me, you're trespassing on private property." I turned around to see a woman in a pristine white blazer and designer sunglasses standing with her arms crossed like she owned the world. Behind her stood two men in golf shirts, both holding cell phones like weapons. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "This is Sunset Harbor Estates," she announced, her voice dripping with the kind of authority that comes from years of telling service workers what to do. "This dock and this entire lakefront area are private property belonging to our homeowners association. You need to leave immediately." I looked at my fishing rod, then at the woman, then at the modest house behind me that I'd been living in for 30 years. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake. This is my dock. That's my house. This is my property." She laughed. Not a pleasant sound, but the condescending chuckle wealthy people make when they think they're dealing with someone too stupid to understand simple concepts. "Sir, I am Caroline Ashworth, president of the Sunset Harbor HOA. I can assure you that no individual owns lakefront access in this community. All waterfront areas are common property managed by our association for the exclusive use of residents who have paid substantial fees for these privileges." That's when I realized Caroline Ashworth had no idea what she was walking into. "And I can assure you," I said, setting down my coffee cup, "that you're standing on private property that belongs to the Morrison family and has for 87 years. One of the men behind her snorted. "Buddy, we didn't pay $2 million for lakefront homes so some local could squat on our beach." "Local could squat?" I repeated, my voice getting dangerously calm. "This local has been fishing from this dock since before you were born." Caroline's expression hardened. "I don't care what you think you remember. This is a gated community with restricted access. You are trespassing, and if you don't leave immediately, I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," I said, casting my line back into the water. "Call them." What happened next was the most beautiful mistake of Caroline Ashworth's privileged life. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911 right there on MY dock while I continued fishing on MY Lake from MY property. "911, I need police immediately. We have a trespasser at Sunset Harbor Estates who is refusing to leave private property. He's on our community dock and claims he owns it. The address is 847 Lakeshore Drive." I smiled and pulled out my own phone, dialing a number I knew by heart. "Thompson and Associates Legal Services, this is Margaret." "Margaret, it's Sam Morrison. Could you please bring that box of property documents we discussed? I think we're about to need them." Caroline stared at me like I'd just started speaking foreign language. "You're calling a lawyer? For a simple trespassing case?" "Not for the trespassing case," I replied, reeling in my line. "For the property ownership dispute that's about to get very expensive for someone." The police arrived first, 2 squad cars with lights flashing, which brought half the neighborhood out of their million-dollar homes to watch the show. Officer Rodriguez stepped out of the first car, saw me sitting peacefully with my fishing rod, and shook his head. "Sam, what are you doing?" "Good morning, Miguel. I'm fishing from my dock on my property, same as I have every Tuesday for the past 30 years. Caroline stepped forward like a prosecutor addressing a jury. "Officer, this man is trespassing on Sunset Harbor Estates property. We've asked him to leave multiple times, but he refuses and claims he owns lakefront property that clearly belongs to our homeowners association." Officer Rodriguez looked from Caroline to me and back again. "Ma'am, are you new to the area? We moved here 6 months ago and I was elected HOA president 3 months ago. Why does that matter?" That's when I knew this was going to be even better than I'd hoped. Caroline had been running an HOA for 3 months and had never bothered to research the basic property ownership in her own neighborhood. "Miguel," I said, "remember when your dad taught us to fish right here when we were kids? Remember when your family rented the cabin from my parents every summer in the 80s? Officer Rodriguez grinned. "I remember, Sam. I also remember your family owning this entire lake since before my grandparents moved here." Caroline's confident expression flickered. That's impossible. Sunset Harbor Estates is a planned community with regulated lake access. Individual property ownership doesn't extend to waterfront areas. Ma'am, Officer Rodriguez said carefully, I suggest you check your property records before making any more claims about ownership. That's when Margaret arrived with the cavalry, a legal file box thick enough to stop a bullet and 40 years of experience dealing with entitled people who thought money could buy property rights. Sam, Margaret called out, carrying the box like it contained gold. I brought everything, the original deed, survey maps, water rights documentation, and the development agreement your father signed in 1985. Caroline stepped forward, clearly hoping to intimidate my lawyer the same way she tried to intimidate me. And you are? Margaret Thompson, Mr. Morrison's attorney. And you are the person who just called 911 to report property trespassing on land you don't own. I am the HOA president of Sunset Harbor Estates, and this entire lakefront area is common property belonging to our association. Margaret smiled and pulled out a document that looked official enough to frame. This is the original property deed, recorded in 1936, showing that Samuel Morrison Sr. purchased 1,247 acres including Mirror Lake and all riparian rights. That property was inherited by Samuel Morrison Jr. in 1967, and by our client, Samuel Morrison III, in 1994. She handed the deed to Officer Rodriguez, who examined it and nodded. This looks legitimate. Ma'am, it appears Mr. Morrison does own this property. But Caroline wasn't finished. That might be an old deed, but Sunset Harbor Estates has current legal agreements establishing community ownership of lake access. Our residents have paid substantial HOA fees specifically for lakefront privileges. You're absolutely right, Margaret said, pulling out another document. This is the lake access agreement your HOA has been paying for since 1985. Your association pays Mr. Morrison $15,000 per year for limited recreational access to his private lake. The silence that followed was beautiful. You could literally watch Caroline's world crumble as she realized her entire understanding of property ownership had been wrong. We've been paying him? One of the men behind her asked. Your HOA has been paying the Morrison family $15,000 annually for 38 years for the privilege of your residents having lake access, Margaret confirmed. It's all documented in your HOA records, which apparently no one bothered to review. Caroline's face cycled through confusion, realization, and pure rage. That's over $500,000. Actually, it's $570,000, I said helpfully. Plus the late fees from the times your HOA was slow with payments. Officer Rodriguez was clearly trying not to laugh. So, to clarify, Mr. Morrison owns this property, has legal right to be here, and your HOA has been paying him for lake access for almost 4 decades? According to these documents, yes, Margaret confirmed. That's when Caroline made the mistake that transformed this from a simple property dispute into a criminal matter. I don't care what those papers say, she declared, her voice rising with desperation. We paid millions for lakefront property, and I will not allow some squatter to destroy our property values. Officers, I demand you arrest this man for trespassing. Officer Rodriguez sighed. Ma'am, he's not trespassing. This is his property. Then I'm making a citizen's arrest, Caroline announced, reaching for my arm. The moment she touched me, everything changed. Ma'am, stop right there, Officer Rodriguez commanded. You cannot detain someone on their own property. You're the one who's trespassing. Caroline froze, her hand still on my arm as the legal implications hit her. Furthermore, Margaret added with obvious satisfaction, assault charges can be filed when someone unlawfully restrains a property owner on their own land. We demand these people leave our property immediately, I said, standing up for the first time since this ridiculous confrontation began. All of them. They're trespassing. Officer Rodriguez nodded. Ma'am, you and your associates need to leave Mr. Morrison's property right now. But Caroline's 2 companions were apparently as clueless as she was. We're not leaving, one of them declared. We live here. This is our community. Your community is that way, I said, pointing toward the gated entrance of Sunset Harbor Estates. This is my private property, and you're all trespassing. When they refused to move, Officer Rodriguez called for backup. 20 minutes later, we had 4 squad cars and 6 officers dealing with what started as a simple fishing trip. The best part was watching Caroline try to explain to the arriving officers why she'd called 911 to report trespassing by a property owner on his own land, then attempted to physically detain him when the police explained she was wrong. Ma'am, you've committed several crimes here, Sergeant Williams explained as Caroline was handcuffed. filing a false police report, trespassing and assault. Your friends here are being charged with trespassing and refusing to comply with police orders. As they loaded Caroline and her companions into squad cars, she screamed one last threat. This isn't over. We'll sue you for everything you have. Looking forward to it, I called back, settling into my chair with my fishing rod. Margaret stayed behind to enjoy the aftermath. Sam, in 40 years of practice, I've never seen someone destroy their own legal position so thoroughly in under an hour. What happens now? Now we wait for them to realize how much trouble they're in. Caroline just committed multiple crimes because she was too arrogant to check property records. Her HOA is about to face lawsuits for harassment and illegal property claims. And best of all, your lake access agreement comes up for renewal next year. Meaning? Meaning you can renegotiate the terms. I'm thinking $50,000 per year instead of $15,000 would be appropriate, given the harassment you've endured. The aftermath was even more satisfying than the confrontation. Caroline spent 6 hours in jail before making bail on charges of filing a false police report, trespassing and assault. Her 2 companions were released after 4 hours with trespassing citations and court dates. But the real entertainment began when the story hit the local news. HOA president arrested for trying to evict property owner from his own land, was the headline, and the coverage made Caroline look like exactly what she was. An entitled woman who tried to use police as her personal security force to steal someone else's property. The video of her being arrested on my dock while screaming about property values went viral within hours. #KarenLake became a trending hashtag as people shared the story of an HOA president so clueless she tried to have the actual property owner arrested for using his own land. But Caroline Ashworth wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. If anything, the humiliation made her more determined to destroy me. Her counterattack came 3 days later. A lawsuit claiming adverse possession, demanding that my family's prolonged failure to assert exclusive property rights had transferred ownership to the HOA through decades of community use. The legal theory was creative but doomed. Adverse possession requires hostile use without the owner's permission. Since my family had been collecting $15,000 per year from the HOA for lake access, we'd clearly been asserting our ownership rights continuously. Margaret dismantled the lawsuit in 15 pages of legal arguments that made Caroline's lawyers look like first-year law students. But the real knockout punch came when we filed our countersuit. We sued Caroline personally for harassment, the HOA for property rights violations, and Sunset Harbor Development Company for misrepresenting property ownership to buyers. The combined damages we sought totaled $2.3 million, enough to get everyone's attention. The discovery process was devastating for Caroline's side. It turned out that Sunset Harbor's sales agents had been telling buyers they were purchasing exclusive lakefront property and private lake access, without mentioning that actual lake ownership belonged to the Morrison family. Buyers had paid premium prices believing they owned lakefront rights that were actually leased from my family for $15,000 per year. The misrepresentation had been going on for 38 years, affecting hundreds of property sales. But the most damaging revelation came from Caroline's own emails, obtained through discovery. She'd written to other HOA board members, "The Morrison situation needs to be resolved permanently. We cannot allow one family to control lake access for our entire community. I don't care what it costs, we need to find a way to force them out." Those emails proved intentional harassment and conspiracy to violate property rights. The case never went to trial. Caroline's insurance company took one look at the evidence and demanded immediate settlement to avoid catastrophic damages at trial. The final agreement was everything I could have hoped for. Caroline paid $75,000 in personal damages and resigned from the HOA board in disgrace. The HOA paid $150,000 in legal fees and agreed to a new lake access contract at $45,000 per year, triple the old rate. Sunset Harbor Development paid $300,000 to settle the misrepresentation claims and agreed to include accurate property disclosure in all future sales materials. But the sweetest victory was the policy change requiring all future HOA board members to complete a property law education course before taking office. 6 months after the fishing incident, I was back on my dock at 5:43 a.m. with my coffee and fishing rod, watching the sunrise paint the water gold. The neighborhood was much quieter now. Caroline had moved away in shame, and her house sold at a $200,000 loss when buyers learned about the lake ownership situation. The new HOA president turned out to be a retired teacher who understood property rights and actually thanked me for maintaining the lake with the fees they paid. I'd caught 3 bass and was working on my second cup of coffee when I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me. For a moment, my blood pressure spiked as I remembered Caroline's confrontation. But this time it was Maria Santos, a new resident who'd moved into Caroline's old house. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison. I hope you don't mind me stopping by." "Not at all. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to thank you for maintaining such a beautiful lake. Our real estate agent made sure we understood the ownership situation before we bought, and we're grateful for the access agreement." "You're very welcome. How are you settling in?" "Wonderfully. The community is much more peaceful now. Our neighbors told us the previous HOA president caused quite a lot of trouble." I smiled and cast my line into the morning calm water. She learned that property rights are not suggestions. As Maria walked back toward her house, I reflected on the lessons of the past year. Sometimes entitled people need dramatic education about the difference between what they want and what they actually own. Caroline Ashworth had tried to steal my family's property through intimidation, false police reports, and legal harassment. Instead, she'd cost herself hundreds of thousands of dollars, destroyed her reputation, and tripled my annual income from the lake access agreement. The fishing was excellent that morning, and every bass I caught was paid for by the people who'd learned to respect property ownership the hard way. At 8 a.m., I packed up my gear and headed inside for breakfast, leaving my dock peaceful and secure in the knowledge that the next person who tried to tell me I couldn't fish on my own property would get the same education Caroline had received. Some lessons are expensive, but they tend to be memorable. The lake access fees now pay for my fishing equipment, boat maintenance, and annual vacations. Caroline's harassment turned into the best business deal my family ever negotiated. As I always tell people who ask about the incident, never underestimate the power of an old deed and a good lawyer when dealing with people who think money makes them immune to property law. The fish are still biting and I still have my Tuesday morning spot reserved.